Welcome to another episode of the Discovery Hub podcast. I am here with my co-host,
Anahit Castles.
And this is our fourth episode. And today we are going to talk about the importance of vulnerability in relationships. So let's get started on this amazing topic.
I can't wait. This is so good.
So why don't we try and
let's define it.
Yes. What is vulnerability?
So vulnerability, the way I perceive it and understand it and live it every day, is the willingness to be open and transparent. Mm-hmm. Like transparent meaning there is no questions about my what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, and vulnerability that I expect back would be the same thing. That what I'm experiencing is also something the other person can perceive from my perspective. And even if they don't agree, even if they don't understand where I'm coming from or what I'm experiencing, they can at least feel the feeling of what it feels like for me. So open, honest, available, and holding that space for others to be that same way.
Right. Yes. And as you were talking about that, I was kind of thinking about, well, what is really vulnerability, right, in relationships? It just sounds like such a charged word. And for me, vulnerability is, oh my gosh, we talk about this so much in our sessions. We talk about this with clients, with our kids, with people around us, with friendships. And vulnerability is really the ability, and I want us to talk about ego, is really about obtaining and getting to that inner child self that is actually wounded, right? And that's why a lot of times we cannot be vulnerable and we have a hard time maybe saying sorry. We have a hard time apologizing. We have a hard time sharing what our deepest thoughts are. But most importantly, how do we change relationships, right? In order to resolve that conflict, we need to have that space to be vulnerable, right? But what about forgiveness? Because I think that kind of goes and ties into that. I think there's forgiveness. It would be great if we tackled a little bit about relationships and then kids and the importance of teaching our kids how to be vulnerable. But it really starts with us first.
So when you were talking about the inner child, it made me think about, the people I work with every day and my own family, my own relationships, my own experiences. When we get the idea when we're very young that what we're feeling or experiencing is not okay, that's the wound. That's the rejection wound, you know? And so we get this notion, with all the psychology words and all the things that we talk about, early childhood experiences of being able to trust the world around you. What are your earliest experiences with getting your needs met? I think when you were talking about the inner child wound, that's what I thought about, that in the early childhood years, we somehow got the idea that the world is not safe. Our needs are not going to be met. So the vulnerability shortens and becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And that space to, take the risk, be open, be out there in the world shortens, becomes smaller.
Right. And it's all about learning, right? If we look at the inner child wound, did I learn from my parent how to share an emotion? Was it okay and safe to share my emotions? Was I asked as a child, well, how do you feel about that? What are you thinking should be done? Or what do you feel should be the answer? Like almost like having that collaboration and communication, which if that was never role modeled, and we have to give also grace to parents from a different generation who probably didn't know how themselves. And I always say it's never too late. So even if you're in your 40s or 50s or 30s or whatever, it's never too late to really learn how to be vulnerable within ourselves. So it's really about looking at our, even friendships, looking at our partners, looking at relationships, whatever it is in your life, whether it's at work, whether it's home, whether it's with your kids, and having that light bulb shift, right? Of, oh, okay, so he or she mentioned this to me. They mentioned that they are upset with me about whatever it is, or they're struggling with something, and us being able to come together and process that together and have that conversation.
Exactly.
So we stay in our ego, right? And I think we should really talk about the ego. We either stay in the ego and the upset and the conflict, or we step back into our, lower selves in the sense of really tapping into that emotion and being compassionate. That's really important too. And listening to what the other person has to say.
I love that. And what does listening look like? What do we do when we listen to somebody? This is something everyone talks about. You have to be a good listener. What is that? What is that?
Yeah.
So a good listener to me, is somebody who can be in the moment. And this is something we have to teach our kids to do, by the way. They don't know how to be good listeners. How do we teach the next generation to be adults that are good listeners, who are available to others, who are there to express themselves and to hear back what they need to hear? So when we teach kids to be good listeners, we're teaching, okay, what do? You look at the person you're talking to, and then you mimic back what they said to you. You say to them, oh, it sounds like you said that when I did this, I hurt you. I made you feel sad. That was not my intention. I'm sorry that I did that. So again, it's, we talk about repair a lot, listening and then repairing when things go wrong. And then I was just thinking about when you were saying, we have to, talk to our children about their emotions and about how they feel. I thought about when my children were young. How did I do that? Because now they tell me, Mom, I felt like this and I felt like that. When they were little, I would say, look, Mommy is sad. Look at my face. I'm sad. And then teaching them what behavior happened that made me feel that way, and then helping them identify that same thing in them when it was happening to them.
Yeah, and it's the role modeling piece, I think, is important. And as parents, we can become frustrated and angry with different things. But again, I go back to that awareness and the vulnerability, and we get this question a lot, is how much should I share with my kids? So I think, and I don't know your thoughts on this, but the golden rule in terms of how much we share. So I'm having a really hard day today. I'm sorry if I'm a little bit off or whatever it is that I'm going through, but I really want to talk about this a little bit later, right? So that's me showing my vulnerability. I want to also know, how does vulnerability show up in adult relationships, right? Friendships, romantic relationships, friendships, because really the lack of being vulnerable in a male or female, right? Regardless, LGBTQ or whatever it is your sexual orientation is, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we are all human and we're all feeling and having these experiences. And vulnerability is a human emotion, right? So how does vulnerability show up in a relationship?
So it's extremely important. This topic is very important because this is where relationships either thrive or fall apart.
Yeah.
And, when there's a, imbalance of vulnerability, one is open and out there and putting themselves out there and then overdoing it because the other person is not doing enough vulnerability. That's a very interesting dynamic. So what does it mean to be vulnerable in a relationship?
I want to stop you right there really quick, because the person who has trouble feeling vulnerable, you have to remember that a lot of times, right, it comes from a place of mistrust. And I go back to the inner child wound. If I've been burnt a million times, my vulnerability capability is going to diminish. It's fear, right?
It's all fear-based.
But relationships need to thrive and need to move forward. So I can't push the other person, no matter who is in front of me, right? Even if it's a coworker, if it's a relationship, if it's a friendship, to be vulnerable, because I'm not in control of that. I can share what I need, but I cannot control their vulnerability, right? And make them.
That is the scariest place to be for a person who is very vulnerable and open and honest all the time. And there's a sense with that rejection, with that inner child wound, that there's rejection and there is fear of judgment. My honesty is going to be judged.
Yes.
And this idea that those who are vulnerable are somehow in control of this judgment, you know, and making it safe for people to feel that they can be vulnerable. But there's also a thing of, you don't always know that there's a fear of judgment. And you feel that either your friend or your coworker or your partner is just moving further and further away, and you're compensating and doing over controlling to elicit that vulnerability. It just makes a further divide.
Right.
You know? So let's talk about, how do we make that safe space for people who feel that judgment of vulnerability and honesty, feel like they can start in small ways to come forward and present themselves.
Questions that can come up, let's say, in a relationship could be, I feel like I'm sharing so much, but I'm not getting much from you. That's one clue. With our kids could be, I'm asking you all the time how you're doing and you're only saying okay, and you're not talking to me. I need you to talk to me. Please tell me, right?
So can we ask specific questions then? So maybe instead of, I'm thinking just for myself, in my life, right? Just instead of saying, you know, you're not sharing with me. How about we do, you know, at the end of the day, we sit and talk about one thing that made us afraid today, one thing that made us sad today, one thing that brought us joy, and one thing that made us feel worried for the future. So we have to find a way to elicit those hard conversations and have like experiences of safety.
I love that. So it's kind of like we're doing a check-in all the time throughout the day, right? We're checking in with our person. We're checking in with our kids. Have you tried it?
Yes.
And
how did it go? You asked.
How did it go?
Oh, wait, you didn't ask yet.
Okay, how'd it go?
At first, it's interesting because I easily overtake the conversation. Clearly, we're doing a podcast because I can talk forever. But I overtook and did not give the space for the person to completely come out and break through the fear. So I realized that. So the next day when we did that activity, or that, you know, little thing, I just sat back and I said, okay, what brought you joy, or whatever it was. And then it was a statement that I felt like was still at the surface. Yeah. We didn't go deep enough. So I kind of said, okay, so that experience. So I started scaffolding that experience. So because I know how to do it, I have to help teach somebody how to do it. So I scaffolded, okay, so you said, you know, thinking about making dinner with me tonight brought you joy, let's say, right? So what about that brought you joy? Is it that we were going to have conversations? Is it that we were going to play music together and share in that one thing that we love music very much? So is it that we're going to share new music together? What is it about making dinner that brought you joy?
Right. Yeah.
Getting detailed. The vulnerabilities in the details.
Yes. And I want to shift gears a little bit into when we try to create change with someone or resolve a conflict, right? Vulnerability will always be at the core. Vulnerability is needed for that repair to happen. And so when you tell someone this is very powerful, and I think a lot of people miss this part in their relationships, and as parents, as couples, as partners, whatever it is, as leaders in companies, is I understand what happened here. Thank you for sharing that. What is it that you need from me to be different. That right there, by saying that sentence, you are being vulnerable. You are not in your ego. And that's power and strength right there, right? Stepping back and saying those words shows you what? What does it show you?
It shows that the person in front of you actually cares about making this right with you.
Right. But even deeper, right? It's all about, I'm okay to create that change, right?
I can
and
do
I
it.
can do
and
it.
I want to. I'm motivated
that's right.
to do it.
Yeah.
But again, we come to a place that people might want to do it and don't know how. And they continuously dig their heels in because it's fear. Again, a fear of failure. I know I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to meet the expectation. So helping somebody get out of their ego to see that you can, if you really wanted to, you can move yourself out of the way and step forward as a person you want to be. And who do you want to be? This is another very powerful example of an exercise to do with anybody, with a child, with an adult, with your partner, with a coworker. Who is it that you want to show up as every single day in the world? Who are you? Do you like who you're showing up as? If not, which parts of that person that shows up every day you want to get rid of and replace with something that's more positive for you?
Right.
And as you make that change, you see yourself turning into the person you've always wanted to be.
Exactly. And what is it that adults say, kids say, as a clue that you are not being vulnerable? And they don't use these words. Mom, you're not being vulnerable. Dad, you're not being vulnerable. Or partner, you're not being vulnerable. It's the three words I say. You are not listening forward. You are not listening. You are not listening.
Or my favorite as a mom, I hear, you're the worst mom ever. And I know I'm not, but in that moment, I missed something.
Yeah.
I clearly missed something.
Yeah.
Or as an adult would say, you clearly don't understand what I'm telling you.
So understanding and listening. So I think when we hear those words, that right there should be a light bulb of, whoa, this is the cue that this person needs something deeper from me to create change. Because a child, a partner, whether you're a wife, a husband, fiance, whatever you are in your life in terms of a relationship, you want to be heard. The male wants to be heard, the female wants to be heard, right? We want to be heard and listened to at the end of the day. And I can have my opinions and you have the right to your opinions, but how do we come together to mesh those two so that we have harmony? And at the end of the day, we come back to what? Because when we are able to be vulnerable, that means we're being respectful to people around us.
Respectful, honest.
Yeah.
And open to intimacy on all levels.
And you said the key word is open to intimacy, because when I can create that vulnerability, then I am creating emotional intimacy. If I can create emotional intimacy, then other intimacy happens, which is core and key, right? But when we lose that emotional intimacy, again, I go back, it's not just romantic relationships and friendships too.
Every experience, every relationship has intimacy.
Yeah.
And if we lose that, then, we're in our armor, sitting there waiting for the next attack from the person. It becomes trench warfare and not harmonious relationship building.
Yeah. So you brought up an important point of what is it that we can do with adults and in our relationships, but what is it that we can also do with our kids and teens, and even, adult kids too. Change can always happen. To create that change, even if we didn't experience it growing up, that's our wound. That's okay. That doesn't mean we have to be stuck. How do you move past that? So, just as some tips that we can use with kids on being vulnerable is, I'm sorry that you feel right now that I'm not listening to you. What can I do to listen better? What is it that you need from me? So it goes back to asking them what they need from us.
Also, really quickly along that same line, sometimes we're not even aware of what part of our behavior showed our child that we're not listening. So I've also asked, what did I do or say that made you feel that I wasn't listening to you?
Love that. Yeah.
Because then how do I know to change something that I didn't know I did? Our children are very triggering to us.
Yeah.
They trigger a lot of our wounds. And so it's hard to step away.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're talking a lot about wounds, and I just so we can kind of explain to our listeners what these wounds are. So there's different types of wounds. Mm-hmm. We talk about them a lot. And usually this is more therapeutic, but we all as humans have inner child wounds. And it doesn't matter if you had the best upbringing, we all come with our different personality types and how we were raised, what we've seen in our environment, and how we as individual personalities, and I'm sure a lot of listeners know about the Myers-Briggs and all these different personality tests, that molds into our environment and how we perceive that. And our inner child wounds can be the following. We have abandonment. We have trust, the abandonment wound, the trust wound, the rejection wound, and even the anxious wound, right? Because it all, So when these wounds, and I always say we always have a little child in us. I have the little Regine. You've got the little Anahit. That wound right there will always be there with us. And those are the triggers that show up in our relationships. So now that we're educated on that, we understand that. Oh, so when this occurred, that triggered this part of you. And then I got upset. And that's why I behaved in this way. And I'm sorry. And how can we make that better? Or how could we do it differently next time?
And awareness is huge in this.
Yeah.
Being able to step back from yourself and observe yourself in that space is a very important and difficult task. So how do we build awareness? What do we do every day to build awareness? And it comes really back down to being vulnerable and honest and listening to the other person when they're saying to you, why are you trying to, let's say in this, I don't know, whatever, control me? Why are you so controlling? So why do I feel a lack of control? Where is my loss of control coming from? And then digging. Okay, this is why. Oh, okay, I understand. I never felt like I had control when I was a child or whatever it is, right?
Right.
Awareness. Awareness, beating our ego over the head too.
Yeah, and I think awareness is such a hard thing to obtain on your own. Because a lot of times if somebody brings up, oh, you did this, you did that, and using you statements versus I statements, there's automatically this feeling of attack. And
armor goes on.
Armor goes on. And then what do?
We fight back or diminish or retreat.
Yeah.
It becomes warfare.
Yeah.
And that's not fair to anybody or this world, because we see how much is going on around us all the time. And we have to always find a way to build our own awareness so that we can present ourselves into it with that kindness and empathetic self.
Right. I think another thing that I really want to talk about a little bit is you've also have the empaths of the world, right? And what's an empath? I really talk about this a lot too in my sessions about empath and teaching empathy. I'm a high empath, right? And highly, I don't want to say highly sensitive, but I've been told that, oh, you're so sensitive. And actually made an Instagram post on that because I've also had that come up too in terms of what does sensitivity really mean and how we have to be really mindful on what that word means because and I just personally go through with myself is I'm just a high empath and when I walk into a room or I'm around people, I just feel people's, it's whether you're feeling their energy or, that feeling when you walk in, you just don't feel comfortable or you feel,
totally
right?
Because I'm exactly the same way.
Or you feel that, wow, this crowd is it's just too many people here. And I feel like I need to just take a break and debrief. And that's okay too. So, recognizing that within yourself and realizing that being sensitive equals honestly such incredible qualities in a person, which could be a good listener, could be an empath, could be so many different things, and that we have to be mindful, bringing attention to that word, because that could be really painful and hurtful when you're saying that. It's almost like attacking someone's character.
And that's actually one of our best traits.
Right.
When I sit with students, families, kids, teens, adults, and we're in session together, the one thing they always tell me is, how did you know that?
Yes.
How did you know that?
Yeah.
Because we have learned ways to tap into inferential emotional knowledge. That's what I call it. Right. Inferential emotional knowledge. Yeah. You didn't tell me exactly, but your little clues of behavior all pointed to the same thing.
Right.
And that is a sensitivity, quote unquote, that is extremely beautiful. It's a gift. So being sensitive, I tell people all the time, thank you. I am sensitive. I am a sensitive person. I sense things that others do not.
Right. And that's a gift, and that's okay. And then also, it's a great trait and quality to actually have, because you actually are able, again, and we have the introverts and we have the extroverts. As a sensitive extrovert, you're able to better, you can connect with people. It's easier for you. Like, you know, you can just be in a room and get super comfortable. You're like a chameleon, and you're able to connect with different people.
Oh, that. I have to say something about the chameleon. I have to. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Here it is. People tell me all the time, you don't have your own personality. You're always someone different.
Oh.
See, that triggers me, because I pride myself in being exactly who you need. So I show up in every relationship in my life, meeting you where you're at and bringing you forward with me. If you need me to be your mom at that moment, I'm your mom. If you need me to be your intimate partner, I'm your intimate partner in that moment, and I bring you with me.
Yeah.
So that chameleon is actually extremely viable thing. It's a very important trait that not everybody can do that.
Right.
So if you're sitting in the darkness, I'm not going to be the light just sitting there going, look at me, I'm so good after you're in the light. Sorry you're in the darkness.
Right.
No, I shift and I sit in the darkness with you.
Yeah.
And we walk forward together.
Right.
I had to say that.
No, and I like that. I like that analogy and kind of bringing that in together, right? The chameleon personality. And that is a gift. I really believe that is a gift that you bring on, and it's probably something you kind of learned and picked up on, but it's also part of your genetics, right? It's also part of, this is who I am. So when I go back to the extrovert personalities, which they're both beautiful, the extroverts are beautiful, the introverts are beautiful. How do we come together, right? Again, we lower the ego, we come into our awareness. And I think, honestly, it always comes from a place of love and compassion. Because once somebody tells you, you are not listening, you're not hearing me, and you know, when you get kind of just frustrated and angry, that's a clue. Because that's not your being. That's not who you are. So you know who you are. And when that feeling kicks in, you know right there that either you need to detach in that moment and just pause, because continuing going in circles, almost like you feel emotionally drained, right? And that happens a lot as well.
And it's okay to take breaks in arguments and conversations. I always tell people, why didn't you feel like you could take a break for 2 minutes? Oh, I could take a break? Yeah, it's like anything else.
Well, anxious personalities, right? That's like, or the ADHD anxious personalities, the go, 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 go. And again, that's more of the extrovert anxious ADHD personality, which will have a hard time stopping
And just not saying anything else.
Right. And just saying, let's take a little break and then I'll come back to you and we'll talk about this. Right.
And again, literally, it comes right back down to love and kindness and compassion.
Yes.
For yourself, too. I have to be compassionate for myself first.
Right.
So that I can do that for others. Putting on my mask before my children's. There's a reason for that.
You talked about judgment. I want to bring in judgment. Oh, gosh, that's a whole other episode.
Oh, boy.
And judgment is, when you talked about that, I was like, I care. I really care what other people think. There's parts of that that are important, right? To teach our kids it's important to care at some degree. But there's parts of that that are not important because then we're living for other people and we're not living for ourselves.
100%. And where is that line?
Yeah.
You know, social judgment. We have this social judgment. What are people going to say about me? What is it going to look like from the outside? Some of that, like you said, is good because it helps keep us in the social norms, like things that we shouldn't be doing. But for most of us, we somehow inadvertently got the idea that who we were was not okay. We had to be something that somebody else wanted us to be. And that judgment of our true being made us diminish that person and say, you know what? Okay, no, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to change and be somebody else.
Right.
And then where is your compassion for yourself then? Non-existent. So you're on autopilot. You're not yourself. Who are you? I want to segue for a minute into something I think our male listeners will appreciate, and our female listeners will be able to have a little window into what it's like to be a man in our society. Growing up, a lot of times boys, get the notion that, boys don't cry. It's not okay to have emotion. Our generation and above, or below, I don't know, I'm not sure how that goes, but you know what I mean, have gotten the idea that being an emotional man, any emotion other than anger, is not okay.
Is weakness.
We're weak.
Yeah.
So what happens when a man is sad? He either shows anger or some other coping mechanism that he goes for to kind of alleviate that pressure of not being able to emote. So we talk about a lot, people on the internet, on social media, we talk a lot about the divine feminine, the divine masculine. What does that mean? The divine of anything is your highest self. Who is that highest self? And I kind of touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
Who do you want to be in this world? We have all parts in us, good and bad, our shadow side. Who are we? Who do we let come forward every day? And that's a choice.
And that's the person that you look into the mirror and you want to be. And I do this exercise a lot, even with clients, is I want you to look in the mirror. And that's when we kind of create goals. And I want you to look in the mirror and I want you to see that person, that girl, that guy that you want to be. That's the divine masculine or divine feminine. That's how I see it.
And the person who's a healed divine self, the divine feminine, let's say in any relationship, it's the divine masculine who's healed, let's say. That divine masculine in that relationship has the opportunity to heal that divine feminine.
Right. And that's the thing, is that in relationships, we're meant to be brought together to heal those parts of ourselves. I think it's so attractive when you are able to find those parts of yourself that you have actually weakness in. That's not a weakness, that's actually a strength. As a man, when you're able to dive into those deep parts and share those without fear, and you kind of take that chance. But remember, we talked about before, if that person went through an experience where they were hurt, or that where their vulnerability or their weakness was trampled on or not respected, it's going to be really hard for them to find that place. So your role as the woman, right, in this relationship, and again, we have multiple listeners, we're talking about to all genders, all sex, everything. When you're able to bring that to their attention, right, and say, I'm here for you to help you heal, and you're here for me to help me heal. That's when success happens.
And there's a piece of fear of judgment that has to be shed in that moment to say, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do it even if I'm afraid. And that's resilience.
Yeah.
It goes back to resilience and doing things even when you're scared.
Right.
Because that's when change happens. That's when you expand as a human, when you do things you're afraid of and let that love in. we have been trained to not let love in.
Right.
Because guess what's happened many times, especially for empaths in this world? We've been hurt. We've been trampled on, like you said. But we keep showing up. How do we keep showing up? How do you show up?
How do you show up? Anahit, tell me.
I show up with my healed feminine. But no, truly though, who is that person? I have to show up even as a hurt person, even as a wounded person who's trampled on. How do I show up to continue to give the message that I'm here for the healing?
You show up by one, apologizing, right? That's, apology is a weakness. No, apology is not a weakness. Apologizing for something that you've done.
It shows awareness.
And
that you have awareness.
Of course. And it shows awareness. And it's not about bringing up that thing over and over and over and bringing up past events, because that also hurts the future of that relationship. And that goes with our kids too. They'll say, stop bringing up the past. Why are you bringing that up again? And because we want to move forward. We want to heal, move forward, and create something new.
So the person who's hurt, how they still show up, how is that? Being able to say, you hurt me this way, but it's it's an opportunity for me to trust in the process of healing, put myself aside, and allow the person to show me with actions what it means to be vulnerable, safe, and intimate.
You say something important. You say actions. Sometimes they don't know how to show up with action, so that's the job to be done. That's where you have to let them know as an empath, what is it that you need from them.
So do we
go
let
back
them
to
know
that.
about themes, or do we let them know about specific actions?
Specific. I always say specific.
But the fear is, if you give something specific, when that person reciprocates with your specific, it feels inauthentic because it was somebody else's idea.
Okay.
How do we navigate
So I'm going to challenge you there.
Because I know a few couples have told me this. In sessions, they've told me this.
Okay. I love you brought up this. It's about being specific. Let me give you an example. Johnny, the house is so messy right now. You need to clean the house. Let's say you're
What does
telling
that
your
mean?
partner. Well, hold
What
on.
does that mean?
That's why I go back to specific. I would really appreciate if you could vacuum the living room. That's me being specific. And try not to criticize how Johnny
it's done.
vacuumed the house. You say thank you and you appreciate it. Same thing with our kids. Thank you for, I would really appreciate if you take your dishes from the table to the sink every time you eat. Versus saying, you always leave the kitchen a mess. Well, what are the actions you want me to change? Thank you for taking the dish. And maybe they took only one dish and they didn't take the other three. But that's okay too. Right? Because it's about letting them know what is it that you need. Or you can wallow in the anger and be passive aggressive and just detach and not address the issue. And that's, we go back to vulnerability and how we work that through and the success in obtaining that. And it takes practice, day-to-day practice.
And I think at the end of the day, for those who are hurt in any situation, allowing the healing, allowing the person to show is a very big step that you can do. That's a step in bravery, allowing to show me.
Yes.
Show me.
I love that. And this topic was a really big one. I'm so glad we got to cover it. And
I love that it was just you and me.
I love it. And we actually, just for our listeners, to give us a follow on Instagram, the Discovery Hub podcast. And also we are on YouTube. And give us a follow. And we have episodes coming out every other week. We have an incredible we have a line of guests coming up. But sometimes we will be doing this just solo, you and I, and covering topics. And we are accepting also questions from you that you are interested on us covering.
Let us know what you guys want us to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And things that are really close to your heart. So that's a wrap for episode 4 on the Discovery Hub podcast. And we will see you next time.